On August 17, 1996, 72-year-old Robert Mugabe, who was serving as the second president of Zimbabwe, married 31-year-old Grace Marufu in a lavish Catholic ceremony at his rural homestead in Zvimba, Zimbabwe. The event, dubbed the Wedding of the Century by the Zimbabwean press, was attended by thousands of guests, including regional leaders such as Nelson Mandela, Daniel Arap Moi, and Teodoro Obiang Nguema. Grace, once a typist in Mugabe's office, had been his mistress during his first marriage and bore him 2 children before their public union. The wedding was a grand affair, blending traditional and Western elements, symbolizing the merging of Zimbabwe's liberation history with contemporary statecraft. Following the wedding, Grace Mugabe became the First Lady of Zimbabwe, known for her extravagant lifestyle and political ambitions. She was so extravagant that she was nicknamed Gucci Grace. She played a significant role in her husband's administration and was often in the public eye until their departure from power in 2017, despite sticking with Mugabe until his death in 2019. Their marriage went through trials and tribulations, from infidelity allegations to Grace's high political ambitions, which is why we want to unpack everything in this video, telling you who Grace Mugabe really is, how she got married to Mugabe, and how she became the most extravagant First Lady in Africa's history. This is the story of Grace Mugabe, the woman who went from a typist to becoming the First Lady of Zimbabwe. Grace Ntombizodwa Marufu was born on July 23, 1965, in the small mining town of Benoni, South Africa, to migrant Zimbabwean parents who had moved there in search of work under the harsh realities of apartheid-era labor migration. Her father was a low-paid migrant laborer, and her mother worked in modest jobs to support the family. Life was far from glamorous, and Grace spent her early years in modest surroundings before the family eventually returned to Chifu, Zimbabwe, where she grew up. Unlike Robert Mugabe, who came from a strict Catholic family with a strong emphasis on education and discipline, Grace's upbringing was simpler and rooted in survival, ambition, and a desire to escape poverty. As a child, she was described as lively, confident, and determined, showing early signs of the bold personality that would later make her one of the most controversial women in African politics. Growing up, Grace attended Chivu Primary School and later enrolled in Christe Mambo Catholic School in Manicaland, but she was not known for academic brilliance. Instead, Grace was admired for her confidence, appearance, and social charm rather than intellectual pursuits. While education played a part in her life, survival and opportunity mattered more. In her teenage years, she dreamed of working in the city, earning her own money, and perhaps marrying into a more comfortable life. At a time when Zimbabwe was undergoing political transformation after independence in 1980, Grace represented a new generation of young Zimbabweans who were not defined by the liberation war, but by ambition, urban life, and modern aspirations. In her late teens, she moved to Harare, the capital city, where she found a clerical job. In 1983, she married Air Force pilot Stanley Goreraza, and they had a son, Russell Goreraza, born in 1984 when Grace was 19 years old. She eventually secured a position as a typist in the office of the president, a humble yet strategic role that placed her near the center of political power. At that time, Robert Mugabe was already the prime minister and one of the most powerful men in Africa. Grace was young, energetic, and far removed from the world of political elites. Mugabe, on the other hand, was a married man in his 60s, internationally respected but living a complicated personal life. His first wife, Sally Hayfron, a Ghanaian independence activist and beloved figure in Zimbabwe, had been battling chronic illness for years. Grace was only 20 when she began working at State House, and her presence quickly caught attention. Colleagues often spoke about her beauty, confidence, and ability to navigate the elite environment despite her humble background. She wasn't highly educated at the time and had no political authority, But she possessed something equally powerful: charm combined with ambition. Mugabe noticed her, and what began as a working relationship slowly transformed into a personal connection. Their relationship developed quietly, almost secretly, within the corridors of power. Grace was still married to Stanley Goraraza. Despite being married, she began an affair with Mugabe, who was still married to Sally. This romantic connection between a young typist and a Liberation War icon raised eyebrows among insiders but remained largely concealed from the public. Sally Hayfron, known for her calm demeanor and grace, was aware of Mugabe's attachment to the young clerk. Despite her illness, she reportedly accepted the relationship, focusing instead on charity work and the people of Zimbabwe who adored her. Grace, meanwhile, was slowly introduced into privileged circles, no longer seen just as a typist, but as someone close to Mugabe's inner world. In 1988, Grace gave birth to her first child with Robert Mugabe, a daughter named Bona, named after Sally Hayfron's mother, a gesture that revealed the complex emotional dynamics within the Mugabe household. Their son Robert Jr. followed in 1992, while Sally was still alive. Sally passed away in 1992, leaving behind a nation in mourning and a political gap beside the president. She had been loved by the Zimbabwean people for her modesty, humility, and compassion, qualities that Grace did not embody in the same way. In 1995, Stanley filed for a divorce, and in 1996, they were officially divorced. After Sally's death, Mugabe's relationship with Grace became official, though it remained controversial due to their age gap. Mugabe was 41 years older than Grace. He was in his early 70s, and she was barely in her early 30s. In 1996, after years of being known unofficially as Mugabe's partner, Grace married Robert Mugabe in a grand Catholic ceremony held at the Mugabe rural homestead in Zvimba. The event showcased not just a marriage, but a shift in Zimbabwe's power structure. Grace had gone from a small-town girl and office clerk to First Lady of Zimbabwe. While Mugabe saw the marriage as a personal milestone, it marked the beginning of a new political era, where Grace would soon evolve from being the quiet young woman in Mugabe's shadow to an influential and often feared political figure. Her rise was not romanticized by the public. Many Zimbabweans felt she lacked the humility of Sally and saw her as overly ambitious and materialistic. Yet, Grace was unapologetic. She embraced luxury, status, and influence without hiding. Her marriage to Mugabe gave her direct access to power, wealth, and international recognition. Grace's transformation was complete, from a typist earning a modest salary to the First Lady with limitless access to state resources, standing beside one of Africa's longest ruling leaders. What made her story striking was the contrast. A young woman with no war credentials, no elite lineage, and no political background rising to the pinnacle of power in a country shaped by liberation struggle heroes. To some, this was a Cinderella story, but to others, it was a story of calculated ambition dressed in romance. By the time she officially became Grace Mugabe, the First Lady, she had already given birth to 3 of Mugabe's children and fully secured her place, not just in his life, but in the history of Zimbabwe. Grace Mugabe, the controversial former First Lady of Zimbabwe, rose from a presidential typist to one of the most polarizing political figures in Southern Africa, largely due to her relentless political ambitions and notoriously extravagant lifestyle. Widely nicknamed Gucci Grace, First Shopper, and Disgrace by critics, she embodied excess and ambition in a country crippled by poverty and hyperinflation. From the moment she officially entered the public eye, it became clear that she wasn't content with merely being a ceremonial First Lady. She began to position herself as a figure of power, influence, and wealth, using her proximity to the presidency to accumulate immense riches. Her political journey officially began when she was appointed leader of the ZANU-PF Women's League in 2014, a strategic move that gave her a direct seat in the ruling party's decision-making structures. From there, she began openly attacking senior Liberation War veterans and long-serving party elites, including then Vice President Joyce Mujuru, whom she accused of plotting against the president. This aggressive campaign led to Mujuru's humiliating dismissal, signaling that Grace Mugabe was no longer just a political accessory, but a real threat within Zimbabwe's power structure. In her fiery rallies known as Meet the People tours, she often spoke for hours, insulting rivals and promoting a narrative that she was the only loyal figure capable of protecting Robert Mugabe's legacy. She built a faction known as Generation 40, G40, consisting of younger politicians who supported her ambitions to succeed her aging husband. Senior military generals, who considered themselves the guardians of the liberation struggle, saw her rise as a direct threat to their influence. Her ambition, however, was not well received by the public, who viewed her as disconnected from the suffering of ordinary Zimbabweans. Under her watch, Zimbabwe faced one of its worst economic crises, yet she continued to display unimaginable wealth and opulence. The Mugabe family owned multiple mansions, including the infamous Blue Roof Palace in Harare, a 25-bedroom luxury residence with lavish decor, imported Italian tiles, custom-made Persian carpets, and bulletproof windows. The property cost over $20 million at a time when civil servants in Zimbabwe could barely earn $50 a month due to economic collapse. Not satisfied with that, she also purchased a $5.3 million mansion in Sandhurst, South Africa, one of Johannesburg's wealthiest suburbs, paid for in cash. In Dubai, she rented a mansion for $500,000 per year, solely for shopping trips, while the majority of Zimbabweans live below the poverty line. Grace Mugabe became infamous for her extravagant shopping sprees in France, Singapore, China, and the Middle East, often flying on private jets just to buy designer clothes. She reportedly spent $120,000 in one afternoon at Harrods in London and purchased over 300 designer shoes from Ferragamo, Jimmy Choo, and Christian Louboutin in a single Paris trip. Store managers in Hong Kong and Singapore confirmed that she favored diamonds, rare jewelry, and custom handbags worth tens of thousands of dollars each. She even once chartered a private jet to Europe just to collect a diamond ring worth $1.4 million, and allegedly sued a jeweler when the delivery delayed. In a country where hospitals lacked medicine and schools struggled with basic supplies, Grace Mugabe built a private dairy empire called Gushungo Dairy, funded allegedly through state resources and farmland seized from white farmers during the land reform program. While ordinary people starved, truckloads of milk from her farm were exported and sold in elite circles. She also took over multiple farms despite the government's policy of one farm per family, reportedly owning more than 15 farms, each seized without compensation. Grace hosted lavish birthday parties for Robert Mugabe, costing over $1 million each, where thousands of bottles of champagne and expensive delicacies were flown in from Singapore and Malaysia. These events were televised nationwide, showing gold-trimmed cakes weighing over 200 kilograms, while the country's inflation reached astronomical levels and citizens queued for bread. Her love for luxury cars was also legendary, with a fleet that included Rolls-Royce Phantoms, Range Rover Autobiographies, Mercedes-Benz Maybachs, and a $500,000 armored custom Bentley. She gifted her daughter, Bona, a Rolls-Royce for her wedding and imported 20 luxury vehicles for the ceremony, while the Zimbabwean government struggled to provide basic public transport. Grace's extravagance also extended to her children. Her son, Chatunga Belamine Mugabe, once posted on Instagram drinking champagne while wearing a $60,000 diamond-encrusted watch, boasting, $60,000 on the wrist when your daddy runs the whole country. This post sparked outrage as Zimbabweans faced unemployment rates surpassing 90%. Her other son, Robert Jr., lived in a $3 million villa in Dubai, and was frequently photographed partying with gold-plated bottles of Louis Roederer Cristal champagne. Grace Mugabe once physically assaulted a model, Gabriela Engels, in a luxury hotel in South Africa after allegedly finding her with her sons. Despite the severity of the incident, she flew back to Zimbabwe using diplomatic immunity, sparking international outcry over her unchecked behavior. She was also known to verbally abuse staff and humiliate officials in public, reflecting her belief that she was untouchable. As Robert Mugabe grew older and physically weaker, Grace's grip on political power tightened. She openly declared that even if her husband died, his name could still be placed on the ballot, and she would rule in his place. At rallies, she famously said, "If God decides to take Mugabe, then I will take over." This declaration further angered the military, who saw her as an outsider trying to hijack the liberation legacy. Her aggressive ambition ultimately led to her downfall. In November 2017, the Zimbabwean military launched Operation Restore Legacy, placing Mugabe under house arrest and forcing him to resign. Grace Mugabe fled into quiet obscurity at the Blue Roof Mansion. Her dreams of becoming president shattered. Many Zimbabweans celebrated in the streets, not because they believed a new era had arrived, but because Grace Mugabe's extravagant and arrogant reign had finally ended. She became a symbol of how political ambition mixed with greed can disconnect a leader from the reality of their nation. In the end, Grace Mugabe's story is remembered not as one of leadership, but as a cautionary tale of unchecked power, luxury in the face of poverty, and political ambition that ignored the pain of the people she claimed she wanted to lead. After the death of Robert Mugabe in September 2019, Grace Mugabe's influence sharply declined, and she retreated from the public spotlight. Once feared as a powerful political figure who aimed to take control of ZANU-PF, she found herself isolated and largely irrelevant in Zimbabwe's new political landscape under President Emmerson Mnangagwa, the very man she once tried to destroy politically. After the coup in 2017, Grace and her family were allowed to keep their Blue Roof Mansion in Harare, but many of their privileges were quietly stripped away. Several of her farms were seized, and the government began investigating the Gushungo dairy business, which had been heavily funded by state resources. She avoided prosecution by staying silent and withdrawing completely from political commentary. When Robert Mugabe died, Grace was seen crying uncontrollably at his funeral, but soon after, she disappeared from public life. She reportedly spends most of her time at the Blue Roof Mansion, living under tight security and rarely traveling. Her children, especially Chatunga and Robert Jr., still live a luxury lifestyle between South Africa and Dubai, occasionally flaunting wealth on social media. Grace faced legal battles in South Africa over her assault case involving model Gabriela Engels, but she avoided arrest by claiming diplomatic immunity. Today, she lives a quiet, secluded life, surrounded by wealth but stripped of political power, influence, and public respect. Locals say she keeps to herself, occasionally seen attending private church events. From once dreaming of ruling Zimbabwe, Grace Mugabe is now a silent figure living in guarded luxury, a reminder of a fallen dynasty that once controlled a nation. Thanks for watching and see you on our next video.